what would have had to have happened in a week for you to look back on that week with pride? Maybe stop breaking promises to yourself. When you say, I'm going to wake up tomorrow at 7 a.m., and when the option comes to hit the snooze button, don't do it. There's one win that you've got for the day.
Welcome to the Mindset by Design podcast with your host and NLP expert, Andy Murphy, where you will learn the tips, tricks, and strategies he teaches his world-class clients to give you the skills to dominate any business.
What's going on, Mindset by Design crew, and welcome to episode 426. Hope you're amazing as always, and life is treating you. I hope it's treating you awesome. I really do. Listen to this. We're about to hit 3 million downloads, which I absolutely love. I think that's really, really cool. We've done this for a long time, and we've had a lot of world-class guests on in the past. And, in the early days, that was really what I focused on. And then over the past 2 years, what I've done is really share a lot of amazing minds, a lot of amazing people. And it was interesting. Today's episodes are going to be a little bit controversial. I love what this guy says on the most part. But there's a couple of things in this clip that there's a key step that he's really, really missing. Now, this guy's become really famous I think it's the Mind Architect. He's got like 900,000 followers on Instagram. He's become quite famous. He's an internet marketer, right? So he hangs around with people like, the guys, right? And I know them all too. But my path is very different to becoming an internet marketer. I've been in the industry a long time, and really these days I work with private equity, hedge funds, family offices, people who are doing that type of business, and they're just not famous. So I moved down a very different path, and I'm about to say something controversial to what he's saying, and I'm going to share it in the episode, so keep listening. But one of the key things what this can do is his system of just taking action first without setting something up and understanding how the brain works a little bit differently, or my perspective around how it's different. Then if we don't do this one thing, then what's going to happen is it can really create devastating effects. It really can create the opposite effect to the result that we want in the end. So keep listening. This is going to be an interesting episode. But besides that, I love the rest about what he's saying about obviously micro habits and long-term behavioral changes. The podcast it's actually taken from is I've only just discovered it. It's been around for a while, and he's a fellow Brit, and I love it. It's the Diary of a CEO. It's really cool because he's interviewed a lot of different neuroscientists, and what's interesting about all that is like the neuroscientists have slightly different opinions about how to create behavioral changes. And it was interesting. I was on stage a week ago actually in Scottsdale for a company called Healthpreneur. Wasn't supposed to be on stage, but hey, Yuri Elkin, who's coming on the podcast at the end of the month, he's epic. So I jumped on stage and blew everyone's mind, of course, and all the rest of it. And next week, I fly to New York, and we're going to be around people like Anthony Rothschild, Warren Buffett's son, people like that. So again, we talk about the power of immersion. That's a key thing to put myself around these people. And they're going to be on stage. I then speak for the same company in the Cayman Islands the same week. So it's an interesting week. It's an interesting week next week. And I'm really, really pumped about it. I'm just building my presentation out right now. And going back to what I was saying, I love, go and check this podcast out, by the way, anyway, The Diary of a CEO. You're going to absolutely love it. But my point is, everyone's got slightly different versions of reality, meaning everyone's got different opinions and different ways they do things. So this guy I really like him. I think he's cool. But this one key area I really believe is a gap, and if it's not done right, it's kind of a mistake. And just from working with thousands and thousands of clients over 21 years, there's a few things that I do differently to create the results that I do very, very fast in people. And this is definitely one of them that I'm going to discuss in this episode. Sound good? Awesome. So keep listening and make sure that you're writing me a review. You're finding me on somewhere on social. Make sure you're clicking on the link and just connecting with me somehow. Because the 8-Figure Thinker University, I still believe, is the most profound mental training system that exists on the planet. If you want to take yourself to the ultimate entrepreneur, it is the missing link. It is the missing link that everyone, so many people miss. Even at the highest level, when you're dealing with companies who are worth $150, $1 billion plus, who I work with, it's a case of there's so many different ways that they've achieved the result. But ultimately, it's about, can they handle the weight of the speed and intensity of that growth every single day? Because you might have the skill set and you might be the best at what you do. But it doesn't mean as the pressure comes, as everything grows, that your nervous system and brain is finely tuned and can handle that weight, right? It's like being the best boxer in the world in the gym. And I've worked with a lot of world champions. But when you get to the spotlight and the crowds there and the noises are different and the smells and the taste and the cameras and the millions of people, can you perform like you did at the gym at that world-class level? Well, most people can't. 99.9% of people can't. That's the same with entrepreneurism. That's the same with business. And I want you to understand that. So go to andymurphy.online. I've got two Forbes articles coming out in the next couple of weeks. I'm going to be putting another blog on there. And again, I'm just adjusting andymurphy.online. But right now, you can go and download some awesome stuff. You really, really can. The Total Mental Control Handbook, you need to get that book. It's badass. But you can also go over to the shop. And if you're a trader, you've got the Genius Trader, which is, well, it's going to help you a lot, man, and with your trading game, right? And the other side of it is you have the 8-Figure Thinker University. If you can install your ultimate self right now as you begin your journey, then you're going to exponentially increase the speed that you're going to be able to handle the weight and pressure as you move very, very fast. And it could be earning 5 figures, 6 figures, 7 figures, 8 figures, 9 figures. It doesn't matter. This stuff is golden and it's there for you. It's there for you. So head over to andymurphy.online, click on the shop, and away you go. If you want to work with me personally, several different ways we do that, and it depends where you're at, right? I could take you through a weekend in person online. I can take you through 90 days. I could take you through 12 months. I can take you through a 5-day immersion where you jump in with scientists on neurofeedback machines, and we play with your neurochemistry through certain supplements, and you pop out the other end a different version of you, and then I build your psychology from there. So there's all these different ways that I make you into a hyper performer, and there's only one way to find out. Head over to andymurphy.online, click on work with me, click on application form, and let's have a chat. There's many different ways, and I'm here to help, And speaking of helping, should we jump into today's episode? Thought you might say that. So let's do this right now. I'll see you at the end of the show.
You talked about the paint, the layers of paint that build confidence. This is something that I've been particularly compelled by because so many people that listen to this podcast struggle with the idea of confidence. And there's a big industry out there, as you've said, that says, look in the mirror, tell yourself you're a millionaire. say it 3 times, write it in your journal.
Yeah.
But then as I reflected and as I've written in my book, the thing that, and it relates to what Alex Hormozi said, is the thing that I've learned is it's all evidence, for better or for worse.
Stack of undeniable proof.
And it goes the other way. That evidence that you got at 7 years old when you went up and tried to do a public speech and everyone laughed at you is it's a thicker layer.
Correct.
Than one layer of evidence to say that you're capable. It's a harder layer to sort of strip. If there is someone listening now and they want to maybe orientate their drive to the fulfilling pursuits that you talk about, but also they want to build their confidence, what advice would you give them? I imagine that's 80% of the listener base here.
Act first.
Okay.
You have to lead with action, because if you are someone that deals with a crippling sense of insufficiency, your ability to discount any good thoughts you have in your mind is going to be so strong. If you try and lead with positivity first, I need to think it, wish it, believe it, and I will achieve it, your set point of negativity is going to just crush that into the ground. I'm speaking from personal experience, right? As the guy that was chronically unconfident and still has, the imposter syndrome that does creep in. You have to start with action. It needs to be, okay, what would have had to have happened in a week's time for me to look back on that week and find pride in myself? Pride's seen as something that you should be ashamed of. It's one of the 7 deadly sins. But David Goggins, I did an episode with him a couple of months ago. We could put it in the show notes if people are interested. And he said pride is something that everybody misses, that having pride in your name, your performance, the way that you show up for other people is something that you can do. But you need to do something that is worthy of being prideful about, right? What would have had to have happened in a week for you to look back on that week with pride?
Okay, crew. Let me jump in. First of all, I love what he's just said. I think it's great. I do. This last question, I really think is important, because what that is called is future pacing. And this brings me to a key point of what I feel the mistake is and what he's teaching. It's not that he doesn't understand it or know it, but what he's not teaching is a very important step. But what he's saying there is that question, which does actually help lead to this very important step. Let me explain. So what he's doing there is something called future pacing. Future pacing is being able to forward the movies in your brain, the images in your brain, to see a different perspective. What he's doing then is something called timelining. Timelining means then he's having the perception of looking back, right? So even those two little steps of sequences start to change your perspective, right? By changing that perspective, you're seeing things from a different angle. Seeing things from a different angle means we have a different feeling, right? We have a different belief. So that's very, very important. So let me come back to that. Let Chris jump back in.
Okay, maybe stop breaking promises to yourself. When you say, I'm going to wake up tomorrow at 7 a.m., and when the option comes to hit the snooze button, don't do it. There's one win that you've got for the day. That's action, right? And it is just, it's trite to say the Peterson clean your room thing, but the reason that works is that you start with the smallest ever step and you expand out from that. You want to become a writer. You want to leave your job and become a writer. Okay, can you commit to writing 1 blog post on Substack per week for the next 3 weeks? That would make you feel like less of a loser if you did that. Action has to come first if you're the sort of person who is chronically unconfident, because you will drag your sense of identity behind you. Mark Manson says that identity lags behind our status by about 1 to 2 years. So for both me and you, in 2 years' time, we'll go, I understand why I was in LA that day, and look back. Start with action and make small promises to yourself that you don't break. If you had a friend and every single time that you and your friend decided that you were going to go out for dinner, that friend either showed up 2 hours late or didn't show up at all, you would stop trusting that person. That is the relationship that you have with yourself. You need to be able to trust your own word. And a lot of us don't, because life is very convenient. And it is easy for people to not stick to the promises that they set themselves, because our ability to be idealistic is always going to outstrip reality's ability to deliver that to us. As soon as you posit an ideal, you then begin to compare yourself to that ideal. And true hell is when the person that you are meets the person that you could have been.
Again, great stuff. Great stuff. I agree with everything that you said, and I like the way you contextualized it. However, easier said than done, right? Easier said than done. If you have a chronic pattern or behavioral pattern that you've been doing since you have been a child, and you in that moment you go, I am going to stop, right? So if you've always overslept, you've hit the snooze button like 20 times every single day, and you decide one day, that's it, right? The future me does something different. The future me does something different. That's great. Willpower right now. I'm going to stop this. What's the chances of that pattern stopping? Very small, right? How are we stopping it? What he's teaching is willpower, which is great. But willpower is finite. It only lasts so long before it burns out. And the challenge with that in the morning, if you're running deeply unconscious programming still, then in that moment in the morning when you are still running, you are still in trance, your brainwave is still in theta or in definitely alpha, meaning it is still, you're still groggy from the night before. In that moment, you are running outdated software. It's hard to interrupt the pattern with a new behavior in that moment using willpower. Does that make sense, first of all? This is very important, right? And there's not many people going to hear this episode as probably going to watch the episode that in the clip on YouTube, right? Because I don't do really YouTube. I've got a YouTube channel, go and check it out. It's got hundreds of posts, but I don't focus on growing YouTube. I generally work with private clients and create results. I do stages, in-person events, corporate trainings, and immersion experiences, right? I don't really do social media, and I don't really do internet marketing fame. So there's more people going to know him than there is going to know me, right? However, there's big mistakes. So the challenge with that and what he's creating is an outdated pattern. So if you have the ability to interrupt that pattern in the moment with willpower and say, I'm going to do something different, he's absolutely right. Of course he's right, right? That micro decision right there in that moment is going to then be reinforced because it's going to release serotonin, which is the reward chemical, not dopamine necessarily, which is the motivation chemical, although it is going to do that too. In that moment, then if we don't keep that pattern going, right, after X amount of days, and remember, a habit is not formed over 21 days or 7 days. It takes between 18 to 254 days to form a new habit. So if we understand that, then we have to be extremely diligent, of course, right, to interrupt that pattern every morning. But what happens when we don't? What happens if that day, that willpower, you just say to yourself, I'll just press it today. I'll just press that button today, that snooze button. This is so comfy in this bed. I'm staying here, man. What happens? Well, you will then feel bad, right? What happens then is that old habit formation, that unconscious strategy will get lit up again, and now it will be connected with something called a dopamine loop, okay? That dopamine loop is reinforced, and then what else is reinforced is I'm saying all this can be, is the sabotage component, which triggers the default setting or the root causes or the old identity. And that self-harm, which is I don't deserve, I can't do this, look at how I failed, all the rest of it. And that can affect your mood for the rest of the day. And if it affects your emotion for the rest of the day, do you think it's harder or easier to do it the next day, to perform a new way? It can be more difficult. So it takes a lot of willpower, which is brilliant because we're talking about how to create ultimate performance. But that willpower in the morning can become very, very tricky if this isn't, if we're not dealing with deeply unconscious patterns. Everything that he's talking about is conscious. That's like talk therapy, right? That's like it. Do you understand what I'm saying? I hope you understand what I'm saying because it's extremely important. So there's very few people in the world who become world champions for a reason. When you're comparing someone like David Goggins or even Alex Hormozi, they are a very, very high level. But what he's talking about is his audience isn't as high level. They everyday people want to inspire to be greater. So the challenge with that is they don't have the same level of willpower. So if they don't have the same level of willpower, we have to be very, very careful of what sequence we set up, right? So I'm going to tell you how you change this, right? In the next little clip I jump in at. But hopefully that makes sense. And I want you to rewind that, listen to it again.
Sometimes I ponder how, you've probably seen this in your own life, I'm sure you have, where you'll have a friend in your life. I've got a couple of friends back home who I've tried to help in some way, maybe give some advice when they're struggling in their hardest times, and the advice has been ineffective. And then you've got another friend who will just need one idea. They'll be listening to your podcast and one idea will be the seed that changes their life. I often think that I overestimate the power of words because everything you've said there makes perfect sense. Mm-hmm. But we both know that 95%, maybe more of people that have just received that, it will not convert into any kind of behavior.
Habits are hard to break, man. And the habit of not doing things is unbelievably difficult to get past. It's one of the problems with anyone that listens to your show or my show. You will love being cerebral, right? You will love the idea that I can use cognitive horsepower to just get myself out of problems. And there is a case of learning as masturbation, right? And believing that learning about something is the same as enacting it, and it's not. That's why it has to be action first. A quote from one of my friends that he uses when he's thinking about a concept is, does this grow corn? Basically, is it useful? Tell me how I can use this in my life. Does it grow fucking corn, right? It's this beautiful sounding concept, cognitive bias that helps me understand the way that my brain works and my relationship with everybody else. How do I use that in my life? Give me something to apply it to. And that's why with the confidence thing, choose promises that you will never break to yourself. I'm going to get up on time for the next month. I am not going to hit the snooze button. If you do that and you look back in a month and you go, oh my God, that's the first time I've done that in forever, maybe. That's a big win. And you can do the James Clear thing. We'll write it on a board. We'll track it, what gets measured, et cetera, et cetera. But the main thing is just keep promises to yourself. And that is a good way to go from, here is an insight I learned about, I want to do breathwork, cold plunge, go to the gym, fast until 12 midday, get up on time, sunlight in the eyes, and then whatever it is, right, that you want to do, turn it into a promise. Don't break the promise.
Again, Chris, love what you said. But what happens if you do? What happens if you do break a promise? Then the challenge becomes is then we're going to get something which I call a snapback effect. That snapback effect elicits the old unconscious patterns, right? So it's all very well and good if we keep the promise. If we don't, then this becomes an issue, right? It becomes an issue. And I agree with him. I love the analogy corn. Does this make corn? Because action is the most important thing, of course, right? It's an external indicator if this is actually the behavior has changed, of course, right? But again, this is all, again, what he's talking about is kind of cerebral. Because cerebral, yeah, people love to play in, like, this is why we play computer games. This is why we love thought experiments. This is why we love the ideas. This is all absolutely true. Absolutely true. And I love what he's saying. But the key element that has to be done first before action, and I'll talk about identity in a second, because I agree but disagree with what they were saying before about identity. The key thing that has to change is the images that are automatically playing connected to the reward mechanism, or the dopamine loop, which is the motivation to take that action or to stop that habit. If that unconscious pattern or those images, thoughts and feelings are not there, then what we're going to continue is the old behavioral patterns, and what we're going to continue is the constant fight to be able to interrupt that pattern with willpower in that moment. The first thing that has to happen before action is to create a unconsciously installed new images and new identity of who you are, that's connected to micro decisions of dopamine, connected to the big outcome of dopamine, connected to this identity. When that muscle or the neurology is starts to be built, then how much easier is it to interrupt that pattern? How much easier is it in the morning to fire an anchor, which is a stimulus response, right? Which I can talk about another time, and then create an interrupt, which is what he's talking about, which is sticking by your promise, and, for example, which we're using in this context, getting up and not hitting the snooze button. So when you start to understand that, that's how we remain, or we consistently build micro habits towards that decision, right? And that's how we continually move forward and take action, which is the ultimate absolute thing. But if we do not understand the steps that I'm talking about, then what's going to happen is you're going to get this massive snapback effect that is going to affect every other decision, right? So it is about updating that wiring. It is about building that muscle unconsciously. And so at least we have something called that I call a resource state. That resource state means we are building a neural net to move back to. It's like when we deal with trauma. It's like when we deal with post-traumatic stress disorder, or we're dealing with really deep work, right? Unconsciously. We can't, this is the, I'm going on a rant, as you can tell, man, because this is like, it's like my life's work is around these topics. So when we, the challenge with general hypnosis, or when we are dealing with, and I do hypnosis for 16 years. What we are talking about when we, a general practitioner or therapist or counselor or psychologist or psychiatrist, what they'll do is they'll take you back to root causes. This is the worst thing that you can do in the frame of mind that someone's in when they come in pain. If we take someone back to the root cause, we sit them in that pain so they gain a different perspective. This can be so self-destructive. I've worked with so many people who come to me years ago, and especially when I worked with this type of stuff, with trauma years and years ago, it was they come back to me and they'd seen psychiatrists or therapists for years and years, and then I come in and I fix them so fast. And the reason is because you cannot take someone back in pain to the original pain. If you understand the concept of neuroplasticity, and the brain is wired, it works like a muscle, then you're going back to build and focus on pain. and pain and pain and pain and pain and pain and pain. This cannot happen. We need something called a resource state. And I developed these resource states which are future versions or safe places or perspectives, and we link those in using anchoring or stimulus responses, right? And once we have that place, now we can go to work. Without that, it's such a... Man, I've seen people come in messes because of this stuff. And so the key element that Chris is missing, and I'll say it, Chris, I hope you listen to this and we chat about it, is, and Alex Hormozy and all of these guys, right? I hope I'm 1 degree of separation from them all, right? You cannot just take action unless you are an outlier with the most insane willpower. And if you are an outlier with the most insane willpower, let's make this easier for you by developing these dopamine loops the correct way. Dopamine loops is a concept I have taken or got spoken to from a good friend of mine, Matt Gallant, who runs the top new nootropics company in the world by far. Links in the show notes, Nootopia. And also runs BioOptimizers and just launched a health book with Hay House that genuinely will change the world. It genuinely will. So check out Matt Gallant. Wade Lightheart is his business partner, but check out Matt Gallant and Nootopia. Best in the world. But he was talking and teaching me about the concept of dopamine loops that he really utilizes, and his background was actually you working in gyms and fitness, and he used to utilize these dopamine loops that way. But I used to utilize it in performance and creating movement and action and results with people. So this is all conscious, but it's all changing unconsciously. So if we can go in and adapt the unconscious first, then the action, the behavior becomes much, much easier to change, much, much easier to interrupt, and much, much easier to consistently build through micro habits and micro steps. So, Chris, I hope you're listening, brother.
One of the really important things you said there was about the size of that first step. I was reflecting there on the way that video games are designed to make sure that every subsequent level is not too intimidating that you lose motivation, but it's not too small that you lose motivation as well. You can lose motivation on both ways. And so it's the same with crosswords and video games. They get incrementally more challenging to keep you engaged. The size of that first step is I think, a central point there, because when people listen to podcasts with people like me and you or Andrew Huberman, and they hear that they've got to maybe get up at this time, go outside, gaze, earth, like put their feet on the ground, cold plunge, And I go, I'm going to do that. And I set that as my first step.
Yeah.
I'm set up for failure.
Yeah.
How important do you think the size and the subjective size of that first step you take to build trust with yourself is, and to start that discipline?
The goal isn't to have the perfect daily routine tomorrow. The goal is to still be winning your daily routine in 50 years' time. If you expand your time horizon sufficiently, you will realize that very, very tiny steps can compound. Look at the graph of mine or your followers on Spotify, especially mine, right? Because I was doing my show for so long and it's just nothing, everything. Well, why? Well, it's because it's latent leverage. It takes so many layers of paint to get there. So yes, the first step has to be incredibly small. Do that. Make it so small that you can't say no to it. And then what's next? And then what's...
Now, this last part that Chris is talking about, remember, this is just a clip. It's just a clip from a big interview of many interviews of his brand, right? So we're just isolating this one thing. So what he's talking about then is absolutely the most important thing. And from a conscious level, which is what he's talking about, we're not talking about unconscious anything. He's saying make something so simple that you will take that action, right? And that's great. And then everything compounds. And yeah, he's right. In 50 years, you want to be able to continue that habit, just like brushing your teeth, right? The truth behind it is this is all done unconsciously. And to get started, you need to have different images in your head. Otherwise, those images aren't going to, it's going to be more and more difficult. And we've got to make sure we're not getting the snapback effect that I came up with. And I teach, again, all of this in the 8-Figure Thinker University. But that's the end of the show. I hope you enjoyed it. A little bit of controversy. I hope that kept it interesting. Again, I got a lot of respect for Chris. I'm just sharing my perspective through my experience. And at the end of the day, I do things my way. He does things his way. I do work with who I work with. He works with who he works with. And we all have different opinions. And that's what makes life really interesting. So speaking of interesting, head over to andymurphy.online. And if you're in business, come and hang out with me on LinkedIn. That's where I'm going to be spending most of my time. I just started a new account. And I'm going to be spending a lot of time on LinkedIn, going to do LinkedIn Lives, all the rest of it. So hit the show notes, come and find me. Well, it's not even show notes, it's show descriptions, right? Show descriptions. Go over there, hit the link. Make sure you head over to andymurphy.online. Make sure that you're hanging out with me somewhere on social. Make sure you're going to the shop on andymurphy.online. And if you want to really deep dive into the next level, and get the same tools of what I do, work with hedge funds, I work with founders, I work with family offices, venture capital, I work with all of these type of people. If you want the same techniques and skills that are helping those guys, then click on work with me, apply, and there's many different ways I can. So, sound good? Beautiful. Go and do that right now, and until the next time, why don't you share this? Why don't you comment? Why don't you give me a bit of love back? And then, until the next time, keep kicking ass. You deserve it. And, one more thing. Why don't you smile for me?
Thanks so much for listening to today's episode of the Mindset by Design podcast with your host and NLP expert, Andy Murphy. We'll catch you next time.